The laugh hit like a thrown glass and the lobby went quiet. It cut across the chandeliers and the potted palms and all the small, polite noises that keep a rich building polite. He laughed with a clean, bright sound, sharp as a knife and loud enough to name the room. He wore a suit that could buy every floor. He owned the air for a moment. Jamal stood with a mop. The mop smelled like lemon and old floors. His shoulders were straight. His hands were steady. His eyes were soft. He kept them soft like a man who has to look at people all day and keep his heart safe. The shoes at his feet were thin. The leather was a map of long roads. The soles had seen highways and kitchen tiles and the hard edges of winter. They had stitched patches where life had ripped them open. They told a quiet story of work and of wanting. The billionaire pointed. The room watched. Phones came up like little black flowers. A flash, a whisper, a bet, whose side the world would take. "You should get new shoes," he said. The words dropped like a verdict. It sounded like a judge in a small room. It sounded like a headline waiting to be typed. Jamal smiled the way people do when the world is trying to crush them, polite, gentle, without anger. That smile was a thin shield. It bent the air, but it did not break. The billionaire's grin stumbled. For a heartbeat, the man in the suit expected the smile to crack. He wanted it to crack. The cameras pressed. Someone in the crowd laughed like a seal. Someone else recorded, hungry for a soundbite. The lobby's glass swallowed the joke and set it aside like something to be polished later. A phone clicked. A light blinked. Jamal bent, not in shame, not in hurry, but to tie a frayed lace. When he bent, something small and stubborn showed itself. Inside the shoe, hidden by years and sweat, someone had stitched a name. It was faded, the thread soft as memory. It was a child's scrawl, a crooked line of love. A small hand had tried to spell something steady. The billionaire leaned forward to see, as if leaning could make him larger. His laugh hit the side of the marble and came back a little smaller. The camera moved closer like a curious bird. A whisper moved through the crowd. Jamal's fingers did not tremble. He kept tying like a man who had done this 1,000 times and had nothing left to learn from strangers. The room smelled of polish and coffee and people waiting for a small cruelty. The billionaire wanted the moment to be a story he could tell over dinner. He wanted to swivel the night into a parable about success and failure, about how some people have clean shoes and some people have names sewn on by their children. What he did not know was what that name meant. He did not know the small history wrapped around that thread. He did not know the late nights the shoe had kept him moving. He did not know the hospital parking lot where Jamal had sat and thought about the boy who had knelt up with a needle and a stubborn laugh and stitched a name into his father's world. The cameras flashed again. Jamal looked up. The lobby held its breath like a lung waiting. His eyes met the billionaire's. They were waiting, not for permission, not for pity, waiting like a person waits for a train, calm, patient, sure it will come. For a moment the room had no language. People swallowed. There was a sound like a coin dropped into a long jar. The billionaire's grin thinned. He wanted to press the edge of the joke into a clean shape. He wanted applause. He wanted the small, easy truth of humiliation to fall and be neat. But the shoe refused to be small. The scrawl on the lining read like a secret. It was crooked. It named a child. Maybe it said Lil Tariq. Maybe it said Maya. The letters had been pulled tight by a small, determined finger. The thread had faded, but not the meaning. It was a proof, a bright proof that someone loved the man who wore those shoes enough to mark him like treasure. The crowd shifted. The phone lights looked suddenly less hungry and more like candles. A woman who had been smothering a laugh now had her hand over her mouth. A man at the corner of the bench dropped his gaze. Even the billionaire felt something thaw. His hand left the air. His laughter did not find its round again. Cameras kept making sounds, but the story they wanted was slipping away. Jamal smiled again, no anger, no pleading. It was a different kind of smile now. It was a smile that carried a small, private wealth. It carried a memory of a small needle and a small mouth saying, "Put your name in, Daddy." The billionaire had tried to make a joke about shoes and status, and the room had leaned forward to enjoy the spectacle. But the shoe held a thing he could not mock, humility wrapped in love. Lobby watched the shift. Power felt strange. It felt thin. The billionaire's fingers tightened around the martini he had not drunk yet. He swiveled his shoulder. He whispered something to his friend, maybe a plan to turn this into gossip, but the words fizzled. You could see him calculating. He could see the cameras had something that might be better for his brand if he smiled with bruised magnanimity, but the sharpness in his eyes had dulled. A child's scrawl had stolen a room's appetite for cruelty. Jamal set the mop in the bucket slowly, the sound of water like a small timepiece. The janitor's hands were steady. The mop towered like a flag. He did not pretend to be more than he was. He did not shout. He did not pull out a list of grievances. He simply kept his place in the world and carried the name sewn into the shoe like a quiet medal. A security guard who had been aiming his phone at the scene lowered it. A soft cough moved across the marble. Someone said, "I didn't expect that." An old woman at the far end of the room blinked and then smiled, and the smile was like sun through blinds. The billionaire's voice came back small and careful. He tried to recast the moment as kindness, as an object lesson. He offered Jamal $1 with a theatrical flick of his hand, as if giving money could balance an entire history. Jamal's eyes did not flinch. He took the dollar like a man picking up a leaf. He did not look at the billionaire. He looked at the mop, at the name stitched inside the shoe, and then at the doors that led back to the street. The crowd moved with a different rhythm now. Phones still recorded. People still wanted a story, but the shape of the story had changed. The man in the suit had thunder behind his laugh, but the thunder had no history. Jamal had a history stitched into his shoe. The contrast was not fair. Life is often not fair. That is what the lobby had come to see and what it had started to question. The billionaire's friend laughed weakly, then stopped. The building's receptionist cleared her throat. The concierge pretended to be busy but watched with both eyes. The lobby, which had been set for a performance of class, became the stage of something harder to tidy. Outside, the city roared on. Inside, the cameras kept breathing light into the room. A flash captured the name. That flash would travel. It would live in stories and feeds, and in the long nights where people told small jokes to avoid the truth. But the picture could not polish the name into shame. The thread remained. It was a fixed thing. It did not care for opinion. It carried a child's small faith. For a moment, the billionaire looked like a man at the edge of a familiar habit, and the habit had no answer. He had wanted to own the moment. Instead, he had been owned by it. Jamal straightened. He pushed the mop forward, and the fibers sighed on the floor like a slow breath. He pushed with the small rhythm of a man who knew how to keep moving. The crowd began to disperse. People retreated into their appointments and their lives and the little dramas of their days. The cameras tucked their stories into pockets to be edited. The billionaire turned away, not with triumph, but with a new kind of silence that sounded almost like thought. Jamal walked toward the back door. He did not hurry. He carried the weight of his work like a good coat. The name inside the shoe rested against his foot like a secret stone. It would not be washed out. It would not be mocked into nothing. The lobby returned to its usual hum, but something small had changed. The laugh had landed and broken. The audience had learned, in a single electric breath, that dignity can be stitched by a child's hand and is not always the thing that money buys. The camera flashes would become other people's pictures. The story might be chopped and trimmed. But a small truth had been made public. Respect is not measured by shoes or suits. It lives in the hands that mend, in the names that are sown, and in the quiet courage of a man who keeps his head high while the world looks away. The laughter spread like cold, and the room tightened around it. Conversations stopped in the middle of their breath. A PR woman pinched her lips until the skin around them went white. A security guard shifted his weight from one boot to the other like a man trying not to look at a wound. Jamal said nothing at first. He finished the job the way a person finishes a prayer, without rush, with both hands doing what they know. He folded a rag until the corners met. He placed it on the rim of the bucket the way you place a small, important thing on a shelf. He walked toward the closet with the steady steps of someone who has learned that steadiness keeps you safe. "Sir," he said then, soft and steady, the voice you use when you do not want to make trouble. "It's all right." The billionaire barked a little laugh that sounded like a coin tossed into a tin can. "I pay for people like you," he said, careless, like he was namming the weather. He said it as if money could explain a man. A colleague leaned forward as if to help the air. "Maybe you should," she murmured, trying to be kind. The billionaire cut her off with a smile that was meant to be pleasant and complete. "No, it's fine, we all have our place." The words fell like plates on tile. Jamal's jaw moved. It moved the way a drum moves inside a story. He asked, quiet as a clock, "Did you see the name?" The billionaire frowned, curiosity pricking through the arrogance for a second. "Name?" he asked. "Name," like a child learning a new word. Jamal took one shoe in both hands. He did not show it like a trick. He showed it like a proof. He pushed the heel out and turned it so the room could see what lived in the dark. Inside, faint and crooked, a child's handwriting. "Eli, keep going." The letters were a small rebellion. They were soft thread and hard will. A hush moved through the lobby like wind through thin curtains. Someone whispered, "Eli, like," and the white space after the name was full of questions. The billionaire's face changed. The smirk slipped. For a moment his hands were too large for the world he had been using them in. "Where did you get that?" he demanded, voice losing the easy edge as curiosity sharpened into something sharper. Jamal's voice was a drumbeat now. "I fixed it at the shelter," he said, "years ago. For a small boy who lost his shoes." The billionaire laughed at first because he did not know what else to do. Then the laugh stalled and fell apart like a paper boat on a slow river. "Memories are small fires. They light when you do not expect them." The room leaned in, eyes turned like cameras, dialogue bent toward the light. The joke began to feel wrong. Someone at the reception desk cleared her throat and then swallowed the sound. Phones hovered like moths. The billionaire's smile looked like it needed iron to hold its shape. He reached for the line he had been told would save him, only joking, but the line frayed. The PR woman looked like someone watching a vase tip. She had practiced warm statements and crisis phrases and images that made ugly things pretty. None of that fit here. Jamal told the story in pieces, small and plain. "There was a boy," he said, "who came in with nothing but one shoe and a name written on his wrist." Not add color. He did not invite pity. He said what happened as if the facts were heavy enough by themselves. His mother worked 2 jobs. He liked to run. He lost a shoe. He cried. "We sewed the name because he said, so my daddy won't forget me." A tremor moved through the billionaire's mask. He swallowed. The crowd moved like a tide. A woman near the elevator muttered, "Eli, is that?" And a name hung in the air that rearranged the geometry of the room. The billionaire's eyebrows knit. There was a small, private counting in his face. Who is Eli? Which Eli? The billionaire had given money to many things. He had opened buildings with his name on the ribbon. He had a foundation with a board that liked to be on camera. He had a son who went away to college and a grandson who liked toy cars. For an instant, the world of his making bumped into the small world inside a shoe. His laugh had been a tool to cut. Now the tool lay blunt in his hand. Jamal watched him with eyes that held no triumph. There was only a weariness and a steadiness that let the truth show itself. "We sewed it," Jamal repeated, "so someone would know him, so someone would say his name." The billionaire's voice lost volume. Do you know this, Eli?" he asked, because curiosity had become a need. Someone in the back whispered, "Maybe it's the Foundation's program." Another voice said, "Eli was a name on a list once." The room tightened more. The security guard had stopped shifting. The concierge had stopped pretending to straighten magazines. A politics of small acts began to take shape. The billionaire wanted to reach for his phone and edit the moment away. He wanted to make it a lesson with a tidy caption. He understood, suddenly and very clearly, that he had been trying to buy the right to speak about other people's lives. He had been trying to use money to name dignity. But dignity does not come with a price tag. The conversation became a spotlight that exposed his breath. Jamal set the shoe back down as if returning a thing to its right place. He did not ask for anything. He did not make a demand. He simply stood in the quiet that follows a true question. The billionaire's PR woman stepped in like someone trying to rescue a painting from rain. She smiled with trained teeth and offered a sentence about charity and responsibility. The billionaire listened, and while he listened, an old memory, small and sharp, found a window. It was a hospital corridor with fluorescent lights. It was a night with no sleep. It was the sound of a child asking a question that had no easy answer. The billionaire's fingers tightened around an invisible railing. He looked at the shoe. He looked at the name. He looked at Jamal. His mouth moved, but no sound came. The crowd waited for his next move like sailors waiting for wind. The joke that was supposed to be a show for the cameras had turned into a mirror. Mirrors are trouble. They show corners you avoid. The billionaire's friend coughed and tried to laugh and could not turn the room back to a party. Cameras still recorded. But the story had slipped out of the billionaire's hands. He had handed it to a shoe and a rag and the memory of a small, brave child. Outside the glass, the city went on. Inside, the lobby had shrunk to the size of a moment. Eli, someone said softly, like a prayer or a charge. It landed on the billionaire and stayed there. He had a choice then. He could sweep the moment under a rug thicker than a city's carpet. He could make a check and ask a writer to make the story look noble. Or he could feel the small, exact weight of what had been said and let it change him. The room did not answer yet. It waited. Jamal folded his hands and looked at the doors like a man who knows both pain and work. The camera flashed one more time, and in the flash the name looked like a bright thing against shadow. The story had moved from mockery to question. The billionaire's smile faltered and then smoothed in a way that was not quite right. He offered a sentence about funding and programs and how things would be looked into. It sounded like a remedy. It sounded like a press release. But words are thin. They can be used to mend or to hide. The lobby felt the difference between the two. The scene closed around a silence that had weight. People returned to their phones with the shape of a question in their pocket. The PR woman drafted a happy note in her head. The billionaire practiced a look of contrition for the camera. Jamal put the mop back in the bucket and pushed it forward, the fibers whispering on the marble like a slow secret. He walked toward the back door without hurry. The name in the shoe was a small, stubborn thing. It had changed the geometry of a joke. The laughter that had been cold now had to find warmth or go quiet, and the lobby learned something dangerous and true, that a child's stitched name can make a room ask itself who it is willing to be for others. The question hung, open and heavy, and no one in the room had the final answer. The billionaire's hands went cold like someone had opened a window in the middle of summer. The name sat there, Eli, small and sharp. It felt to him like a needle. It felt to him like a bruise. For the first time in that room full of marble and glass, he looked small. Jamal's face did not plead. It did not do the thing the man in the suit wanted to see. It held a hunger instead. A hunger the billionaire had once had and then sold for other things. The lobby hummed low. People leaned back as if someone had told them they were in the wrong movie. Then the billionaire's voice came out thin, like a man pulling a shirt over his head and finding another skin underneath. Eli was my name when I was small, he said. The words were small as a match. They made the marble colder. Jamal's hand moved the way it always moved, slow, careful, a habit of the hands of people who mend more than objects. A photograph slipped from Jamal's pocket and hit the floor like a coin. Dust rose for a second and then fell. The photograph was old glue and softer edges. A child's grin lived in it, a worn sweater, a woman with hands that had known hard things but kept softness anyway. Jamal had kept that picture folded for years. He had kept it like a promise. The billionaire stooped without thinking. He did not know why he was stooping. He saw the face in the photo and felt a sound in his throat he had not planned for. The photograph held a young man in a charity program, awkward, hopeful, a boy who looked like he wanted to run and then thought better of it. The older woman in the photo was the same face he had seen blurred under lights on a foundation plaque at a charity gala he had spoken at once and then forgotten. He had shaken hands with people and smiled and left. He had not seen hands like Ruth's since. The lobby tilted. Power is a simple machine. It clicks and whirs and keeps things in place. Memory is a small stone that can jam those gears. The billionaire's breath stopped on the edges of the picture. He breathed, shallow and quick, like someone who had been in a storm and was counting the seconds he had left. The room moved toward the photograph as if it had been a sound. Cameras pointed, phones lifted. The billionaire's face folded. He found words that were small and clumsy. He asked, Where did you get that?" Jamal's eyes stayed level. He did not flinch. He told it plain, the way you hand someone the truth when all the candles in the room are down to their stubs. "She taught me to tie knots on laces," Jamal said quietly. "She gave me what she could." The billionaire said the name Ruth like a man learning a new prayer. The name landed on him and stuck. He saw the plaque in his mind, the night, the ribbon, the camera flash that made the woman look like an icon. He had attended once. He had handed a check. He had let his name be placed on a wall. He hadn't looked close enough. He had not waited to see the stories behind the plaques. The lobby shrank to the size of a memory. People who had applauded the first joke found their mouths closed. Laughter had been easy. Silence was not. Jamal told more. He told of an orphanage where the lights were sometimes only one bulb and children learned to be brave on the quiet nights. He spoke of Ruth, who never owned much but owned a way of seeing. He told of a small boy who lost a shoe and kept arguing with the world that there was a place for him. He told it in plain sentences, each one honest and heavy. The billionaire listened like a man listening to the sound of his old life echo in a new hall. He shuffled through questions because it is hard to find the map to a place you once lived and then left. Did you know him? He asked, then sewed the question into something smaller. People in the room shifted like a flock. There was a sound that was not loud but meant everything, an intake, a pause, a small rearrangement of priorities. The billionaire's laugh had been a tool. He used it to cut. Now the tool lay dull and useless. The image of the boy in the photo pressed against his ribs. The room had begun to see the story from a different side. It wasn't a neat twist where a poor man pretended to be rich or a rich man pretended to be poor. It was a collision. The janitor, Jamal, was connected to the billionaire's beginning. A small hand had stitched a name into a shoe. A woman named Ruth had tied laces the same way she tied the care of children to her own ribs. The billionaire had built his life on a path that had been paved by people like Ruth. He had walked it wearing shoes someone else had mended. The crowd felt this. Faces that had been amused now looked like people who had been given a mirror. Mirrors are dangerous. They show the soft parts. They show the places we thought we had hidden. The billionaire's voice cracked under the weight of recognition. He tried to walk through the answers with the same ease he had used before. He reached for the kinds of sentences that PR teams teach, sentences with offers and commitments and planned photos, but the sentences did not fit the room. Jamal's story had moved from the shoe to the heart. I sewed it, Jamal said. It was for a boy who said, keep going. He said it like a command to himself. The billionaire touched the photograph and his fingers shook. He had been Eli then. He remembered the way a boy speaks when the world is loud and you have to be brave with your small voice. The lobby held its breath. You could feel the floorboard of the world tilt. The billionaire's foundation had given grants. They had cut ribbons and written checks. They had names on lists and plaques on walls, but lists and plaques are not a life. They are a shape someone else makes when they want to look noble. Jamal had never asked for his name to be on a wall. He had mended shoes. He had tied knots. He had kept a photograph folded in his pocket like a country. The billionaire felt shame come like cold rain. It soaked him slow. It was the beginning of something honest. People in the room no longer wanted a show. They wanted to know how the story would be set right, if it could be set right at all. The billionaire's hands found the edge of the marble table like a man holding a rail on a ship. He looked at Jamal without the old armor. He looked at the photograph that smelled faintly of old glue and new truth. For a moment there was no distance between them. The light in the lobby bent differently. The cameras kept breathing. The journalist in the room shifted toward the human note. The concierge, who had been trained to send away problems with a smile, was quiet. Words about making amends began to gather like slow birds, but words can be thin. They can be used to mend or to hide. The real work is what you actually do when the lights go down. The billionaire's laugh had gone. In its place something else was forming. It was not yet relief. It was not yet forgiveness. It was the beginning of shame and the first soft edge of understanding. Jamal put the photograph back in his pocket the way a man returns a thing to its right place. He did not ask for credit. He did not demand a title. He stepped back into his work with the same quiet courage he had walked into life with. The lobby watched him move. It watched the billionaire stand and try to make a sentence that meant what he wanted it to mean. The moment was heavy with choices. You could buy a line and call it justice. You could give money and smile and take a picture. Or you could let the small history between two men teach you something and change the way you move in the world. The billionaire looked at his hands and then at Jamal and then at the plaque where Ruth's name lived. He swallowed like a man who had to learn humility. The room tightened and then loosened like a muscle that had to learn a new motion. A camera clicked. A flash caught the photograph tucked away. The image would travel. The feeds would make it into a headline. People would talk. But a truth had been made public that no headline could fully own. A child's stitched name had been a mirror, and when the mirror was held up, a man who had thought himself a single author of his life found another hand had been writing on the same page all along. The lobby had learned that dignity often begins in the small hands that mend and stay. The billionaire had learned it too, and the lesson had weight. The room waited as if for a final sound. The sound did not come quick. It came slow, the sound of a man who had been given a second look at himself and did not know what to do with it yet. Climax did not arrive with thunder. It arrived with a slow lowering of shoulders, like a curtain coming down on a stage that had been too bright for too long. The billionaire stepped forward with hands empty, no speechwriter's notes, no polished line to make the cameras nod. He looked smaller in the wide room, and the marble seemed to hold its breath. He spoke like a man who had just remembered a name written on the inside of his own life. "I laughed," he said, and the words were plain. "I was wrong." The lobby listened the way a town listens when the church bell finally rings a truth. Jamal stood where he had stood before, mop in hand, the rag folded on the bucket. He did not rise to meet the apology. He did not make any demand for trophies or headlines. He had asked for a small thing from the beginning, to be seen, that was all, to be seen. The billionaire's face loosened in the way a clenched fist does when it finally opens. For a moment, the cameras did not know whether to keep rolling or to bow their lenses. The PR woman made a calculation with her lips. The security guard breathed out. People in the lobby shifted like leaves in a light wind. The billionaire did something none of the advisors had scripted. He opened the foundation ledger where names lived as numbers and numbers lived as plans. He slid the book across the marble toward the concierge as if he were offering not a check but a map. He said aloud the things that had to be put on paper: jobs, funding for the shelter, a program named for the woman in the photograph, Ruth's house, he said, and the name felt like a bell. He promised money and he promised hands to help. Cameras snapped. People made notes. It was a good headline. It was the thing that could be boxed and shown, but the real change did not happen in ink. It happened in whose shoes he chose to walk for a few slow visits. He began to come to the shelter without cameras. He sat on folding chairs at the back of a room that smelled of soup and detergent and hope. He did not stand when people came in. He did not hand out photos. He sat and listened. And when people spoke, he stopped talking. That was harder than any check. Listening is a quiet muscle most wealthy men forget to use. It pulls and aches. It makes you small until you are honest. At first, his visits were awkward. He arrived with good intentions, like someone bringing a wrapped present to a house where people had already eaten. He learned to sit with the awkwardness. He learned to ask the smallest questions. He learned what names mattered. He learned that the ledger could not hold every human need. He read the faces instead. The shelter people watched him. They watched him because the world had taught them to watch men like him carefully. They did not expect miracles. They expected promises. He gave some. But he also gave something deeper, the time to be corrected. The wealthy man learned, slowly, how to accept that he could be wrong. He learned how to let people tell him what they needed without his telling them what to want. The public watched too. The feeds had already run the photograph with his hands in it. They ran the ledger and the new program announcement. They ran the handshake photo with a caption about redemption. The cameras could not always follow the late-night conversations at Ruth's house when he sat in a cheap chair and someone explained what a wait list really felt like. Cameras could not always capture the way his voice changed when he no longer needed a microphone to be heard. He began to show up for things that had nothing to do with press releases. He carried boxes of coats. He swept a floor once at a request and laughed at himself when his sleeves rolled up and he was clumsy at the mop. Jamal watched him do these small things and did not make a show of it. Jamal kept sweeping. He always would. That was his work. But he noticed the man in the suit untucking his cuff and learning to listen. The lobby watched the change with the slow irony of a weather pattern. People who had cheered the first insult found their applause stuck in their chests. The PR woman tried to craft a narrative that might sell the change. She practiced the lines about responsibility and learning and the arc of a public figure. Her words could be elegant, they could be crisp, they could be useful, but the shelter's people wanted deeds more than phrases. They wanted a hand on the ledger and hands in the work. The billionaire learned to bring both. He learned that offering jobs meant more than name tags. It meant training and patience and the humility to let the people who would be hired tell him what roles would help them grow. He learned humility in the slow, bruising way that real change happens when you are proven wrong in public and choose to let the proof guide you, not to make a show. There were setbacks. There were mornings when a headline turned his good acts into a selfie. There were nights his old friends called and asked for the old jokes. There were donors who wanted the shiny plaque, not the slow effort. He had to choose again and again. Sometimes he failed. Sometimes he answered the wrong way. But the visits kept coming. The ledger became more than an entry. It became a promise that could be checked. The program named for Ruth opened a small room with bright windows and a sign that read simply Ruth's house. It was painted by hands that did not wait for permission. There were shoes lined up by the door, some new, most mended. A wall held a mural of names stitched like small flags. Eli's name was on that mural. People celebrated. The feeds called it a redemption story. The feeds liked tidy arcs. But the people at Ruth's house knew the truth. Change is made by many small hands. The billionaire's repentance played out in private and public. He stopped measuring worth by shoes and started measuring it by the ways people cared for one another. He learned to ask questions and to let answers complicate his assumptions. The final public moment came not with fireworks, but with a handshake caught by a camera that had waited a long time. Jamal and the billionaire stood where the lobby light gathered. They shook hands slowly. It was not an instant of equal power. It was not the erasure of years. It was a small bridge. The cameras flashed and then quieted. There was a long pause. For a heartbeat, the room held the weight of two men meeting on new terms. The billionaire's face had lines that were new. They were not the lines the world admired. They were the lines of a man who had done the hard, private work of shrinking his ego so that something larger might grow. Jamal felt nothing showy in the shake. He felt a hand with an old hurt that had softened. The scene closed like a book on a page that had a margin full of notes. The notes would be written by the people who came after and by those who lived at Ruth's house. The last note on that night was not a check or a headline. It was a smaller, truer thing. Dignity cannot be bought. Wealth can change a life. Money can open doors and feed mouths and fix roofs. But it cannot, by itself, change what is inside a heart. Only humility can do that work. Only listening can teach the rich to be human again. The lobby returned to its hum. The cameras packed away their light. Jamal pushed the mop until the fibers sighed on the marble and the rag lay folded back on the bucket. The billionaire walked out of the doors and then back in again, not for a photo, but because he wanted to sit where someone else's life was being mended and learn what it took to help without claiming the story. The final image the public kept was simple. Two men standing where the light gathered, a handshake that was a small promise, and then the slow understanding that respect and change live in acts, not in captions.